Yeah, she is.
All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Jen Lieben, and I am your tech host for today. I'm going to introduce our speakers for the session here, which is shared responsibility in diversifying the teacher pipeline. So we have Leigh Ann Erickson, who is an educator, activist, and author of What is White Privilege? She's taught in NYC, Chicago, rural Ohio, and Mount Vernon, Iowa. She was a finalist for the 2019 Iowa Teacher of the Year and aims to eradicate racism through justice-driven teaching with a focus on educating white students and adults. Erickson is the founder of Undone Consulting and the Undone Movement, a nationwide movement of racial reconciling. Grateful to play a small role in centuries-long resistance work, she owes much to her family, friends, and mentors. Next, we have Briana Yarborough. Briana is a fourth grade special education teacher and an aspiring school leader. She has worked in both New York City schools and suburban schools on Long Island. During her free time, Briana works with various organizations, creating policy recommendations that will assist in providing an equitable learning experience for Black and Brown children. Next, we have Dr. Brenda Tufte. She's a professor and chair of graduate education at the University of Mary in Bismarck. She has taught in higher ed for 10 years, and prior to that, taught in K-12 for 23 years in Minnesota and North Dakota, and is the 2012 North Dakota Teacher of the Year and a 2017 recipient of the Crystal Apple Award for Excellence in Higher Education Teaching. Over the past 5 years, she has assisted with the Native American Leadership Program at the University of Mary, supporting Native scholars completing graduate degrees in special education and school administration. And we also have Michael Flowers. He is a 9th through 12th grade social studies teacher, assistant varsity basketball coach, and head softball coach at Wilbur D. Mills University Studies High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. He currently teaches civics and economics and world history. He has been teaching for 18 years in the Pulaski County Special School District. So thank you all for attending today. I will turn off my camera, but I'll be dropping links in the chat and monitoring everything. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Jen. Well, welcome everyone. We're so happy to have everyone here, and we're especially appreciative of our panelists who are here. I'm Brenda Tufte, and I'm going to begin with a quick outline so you have an overview of what our session will entail, and we want you to know that it will involve some opportunities for discussion from our participants and also questions. So I'm going to begin momentarily with just sharing the work of our Build for Equity team and share some of the findings, and it's pretty early in our work right now, but we'll be sharing some of the research that we did. We'll discuss the current body of literature and also share some of what we learned from the 6 focus group discussions that we had. And then after that, we'll share some themes from our focus groups, some of the obstacles that emerged from our discussions, some of the solutions. We certainly want to be solution-based and leave with some ideas for how we can successfully diversify the teaching pipeline, looking really at what works, some of the innovative approaches that we heard from our fantastic focus group participants. And then as we're talking about those, we'll be interjecting discussion with our panelists, Michael Flowers and Briana Yarborough, who also took part in our panel discussions. And they had so many great things to share that we invited them to come on and share some things firsthand with all of you. And then we'll share some resources for educators and end with questions for the panel. And if we have any extra time at the end, we'll share some additional resources and themes, but I think that's how far we'll get. So I want to quickly just explain the work of our Build for Equity team. So it really began with the leadership of Lauren Cantel and Bob Williams, and heading our task force was Josh Parker and Jamela Coase. And you may have sat in on their panel discussion this morning. It was fantastic as they responded to our keynote speakers and shared a little bit of work as well. But our focus for building the pipeline and diversifying the teacher pipeline was really looking at the literature and what we know so far about what's working, what kinds of obstacles are districts and schools facing, what situation are we in as districts across the United States, And our goal was then to not just go to the scholarly body of literature and look at the research, but also to talk firsthand to leaders, policymakers, educators of all levels in schools, and hear firsthand from them what was working in their schools and what obstacles they continue to have, what challenges still exist that really require our work. And the goal then is we've begun early on kind of looking at the themes that have emerged and really honing in on those that came up over and over again from the participants in our 6 focus groups. And that's where we are right now. So we're sharing some of the early themes, but the goal of our equity task force is really to create a framework that schools and districts can use to actually diversify the teaching profession and keep that pipeline from recruitment to experiencing that joy of teaching that we want to retention, and how connected all of those are. So that gives you a little snapshot of the work that we are doing and have begun. And here's some pictures of the team. I should have brought that up a little bit earlier. And again, Dr. Jamela Coase and Josh Parker, you heard earlier. And Justin Minkle is another member of our task force, and Leigh Ann Erickson, who's presenting today with me and I, all on that task force. So I have to tell you, I learned more from being on this task force than I ever thought. More than I've contributed. And so it's been just a joy to learn from everyone and to learn from our work as well. So I'm going to invite Leigh Ann to just talk a bit about the problem that we began with and the need for the work.
Thank you so much, Brenda. Yes, I think we really want to identify what the problem is, kind of why we're doing this, what doing this work, what the results can be. So this goes through one at a time. So I want to just give you a little bit of a disparities reality check. Here's the world that we're living in right now. So first, right now, 18% of teachers nationwide identify as teachers of color. And that is compared with about 48% of public school students who identify as 48% of public school students identify as white. So we have an incredible disparity there. And of that 18%, only 7% identify as Black and 1.5% identify as Black men. So that shows you the disparity. Right now, though more teachers of color are being hired than before, they are also leaving the profession at much higher rates than white teachers. And we will absolutely be talking about why that is and what feedback we got from our focus groups about why that is as well. And finally, right now, 40% of America's public schools have no teachers of color, and that is an incredible problem for all students. And I really want to emphasize that. Having diverse educators in your building is good for everyone, right? So the fact that 40% of our schools don't have any teachers of color is an incredible problem that we need to address right now. And that's part of the work we're doing. And if we address that work, there can be really positive outcomes. And here's why that matters. So first of all, students of color, we know that students of color who have teachers of color are less likely to drop out of school. They're more likely to attend college and will score higher on state standardized tests. And this is absolutely researched information. So we know that that's the reality. In a 2016 survey, students of all races reported that teachers of color better support the academic achievement of all students than white teachers do. Therefore, again, it just shows how doing this work, diversifying this pipeline, is absolutely good for students of color and is absolutely good for white students as well. Having a diverse teaching staff decreases exclusionary and inequitable discipline, which is a major problem in our nation right now, and a huge part of what we call the school to prison pipeline. We want to change that pipeline. We want to destroy that pipeline, and having a diverse teaching staff is part of that, and an incredibly important part of that. These are lives that are on the line. This work is integral and absolutely imminent. We have to do this right now.
Sorry, I had to unmute. So thank you, Leigh Ann. A few of the themes, again, our focus groups were very diverse. It was difficult when we got to the end of the 1 hour discussion that we had. It was difficult to end it because people were sharing so much and finding so many commonalities. And Leigh Ann addressed this a little bit already, but diverse teachers need diversity in leadership levels as well as in the teaching field. So making sure that that diversity is important across all levels is something that we heard from so many participants, that it couldn't just be, when you'd walk into a school and that you had a few diverse teachers and that you had, people working in the kitchen or working with custodial staff that were of different cultures, that needed to go across the board up to administration and upper level leadership. And, making sure also that those leaders of color were involved in hiring and making a policy. And as Leigh Ann noted too, that all learners benefit from diverse teachers. So one of the questions that we asked our focus group participants, and I'm going to ask Michael or Briana to weigh in on this, because I know you contributed such good insights to that discussion, was to describe the impact teachers of color that you've seen and heard about from students and educational communities in your system. What impact have you seen as we look at the important benefit of diversifying?
I agree with the, was I supposed to talk? Okay, yeah. What I see the benefit is the student learning and achievement. Me being in the classroom and also being a coach, it's like that hands-on development. And I coach boys, and so for young Black males to see them progress from, when I get them in high school, 9th grade, progress through our system, and then go on to college and make something out of themselves. That's something that money can't buy, and that's something that's a big deal to me. The investment that you make, not only just a Black male, but all kids see that okay, it's actually somebody out there that cares. Like that last slide, 1.5% of teachers of color are male, and so I think it's kind of like a rarity, but when they see it, I think that make an impact on all students, because it's not something that you normally see. Then when they see the success, then that makes the student want to do what you need to do what you need for them to do.
Absolutely, thank you.
I just wanted to add on to what Michael said. I definitely think it makes a huge impact on especially students of color. Being a teacher of color in the current school that I'm in, I've noticed that young girls who just have similar hair than me come up to me and will go, "Oh my God, I love your hair." One time I had braids and they were so excited to see someone with braids. And then that kind of opens the door for them to feel comfortable and feel like they have a space for them to be able to express themselves and let you know what's going on in their classrooms, even though they're not your you're not their classroom teacher. And then it also gives them that idea of, I can ascertain a certain degree. I can go to school. I can see past these four walls. And that's really huge. I wish that I had that as an educator, as when I was going to school. I've only had my parents to kind of look up to. But if I was able to see that, there are teachers of color, there are lawyers of color. If I was able to see those things when I was going through the education system, I think it would have made a huge impact on my education as well. And it makes you feel like somebody actually cares about your education.
These are so vital. Thank you, Briana. Michael, when we were in our focus group, you shared the impact that you felt when you had your first Black male teacher and how that impacted you. Would you share a bit about that?
Yes, ma'am. My first Black teacher of a subject other than like PE, I had a Black teacher in 8th grade. And then the memorable one was when I was in 12th grade, because I really didn't know what I wanted to do in life. And so seeing him have a classroom, seeing him have responsibility because he was a teacher and a coach, and just seeing that and saying, you know what, I need to find out how I can do that, and then hearing his story about how he came from the Marines, and that makes a really, really big impact, especially, and it's not even like black or white, it's just any child that's, you don't really know what your future going to hold, but when you can identify with someone, that kind of just pushed me into teaching, seeing him and the age he was. I'm like, okay, he's 20 some years old. So it just started making me think about, okay, this is a path that I can go in, because I was involved in athletics, and then I can get me a teaching degree and make a decent living. Because I always wondered, it's like, why coaches don't retire? And then I saw the stipend of a head coach, and I'm like, oh, okay, I see why they don't retire. And then not only that, a lot of them don't really do it for the money. They do it because they love it, and that made a connection with me when I saw that. And not only just a black teacher, but a male. I had some strong white male teachers, and that identifying with that too make an impact as well.
Well, I know the work you do for students and for the profession, so we're immensely grateful to those role models that helped get you into this profession. Thank you. Oh, here we go, Leigh Ann.
One of our themes that came up, I think, in all the sessions, and one of the reasons that we don't see high retention rates, that we see teachers of color leaving the profession, is that they experience isolation and burnout. And Briana, you talked about in our focus group about isolation. In your school in Long Island, you said you are one of only 2 Black teachers among a staff of about 75 or 80. And this, as in many schools, does not reflect the student demographic in your school. Additionally, you talked about isolation showing up in practice, and you said, quote, "It's really hard when districts are extremely large and there are a large number of people uncomfortable with diversity, equity, inclusion. And those conversations are really hard to have. You want to leave. And I've said many times I want to leave, and I don't know if I fit in here." Can you share a little bit about how this isolation impacts you as an educator and why you think it's happening in schools?
So I think that when you are a teacher of color in schools that don't have a high population of teachers of color, or have an even equal opportunity for teachers of color to be a part of the school, I think it makes those teachers of color feel like, well, why? And I think some of the reasons, some of the things that I've started to uncover is that people are really unable to check their own biases. So those conversations are uncomfortable because you can't have a conversation unless you're willing to check your own bias. A lot of teachers feel like, well, I don't see color. Well, I don't see race. And those are some things that come up in conversation that make it hard, because you feel like you're not biased, but honestly, those are certain phrases that go with bias. You have to be able to see my race. You have to be able to see my color. You have to be able to see those things, because you need to be able to see why I can add to the community. You have to be able to see why I may feel isolated at times. So it's definitely been a definite obstacle for me. I think one of the biggest things for me is trying to figure out now, how can we navigate through this space? It's a very difficult space to navigate through, because you're kind of like a one-man show. So there's not many people, and especially if there's nepotism within the school. So if you're not a teacher of color and you're hiring family members and friends who all have the same ideologies, you're just creating more of a space of more bias. And it's really hard to kind of unpack those things.
Yes, I think that's so key. It's like this cycle of isolation, right? That you're just continuing to create that space. And I think, as you just said, one really tangible action item white educators can do is to take a bias assessment, start to root out personal biases, understand that they exist, and that can be a really, really positive thing. I want to move over to the burnout side of it as well. So thank you for sharing about isolation. But on top of isolation, you also talked about experiencing burnout and being overburdened with roles that aren't necessarily yours as an educator. In fact, you said, as a teacher of color, you're always expected to handle behavior. I don't want to always be the go-to, but if I am the go-to, why not also let me help other teachers learn how to manage behavior and do restorative justice? And one thing that I found so powerful about this statement is that you're asked to be this resource for the school. You're being leaned on so heavily. But then when you say, well, okay, let me do this in a leadership role, you're told no. And so what I would love for you to speak on is, what is that like professionally for you? And what would you like to say to other administrators who are leaning heavily on the small number of teachers of color for behavior management?
Yes. So what I would say to other administrators is, if you are going to lean on teachers of color, make sure that when you're making decisions in your office with other administrators, that you have that teacher of color, that you're incorporating them in those conversations. That's going to set the tone for management in the school. Allow them to be the forefront and be the face, because it kind of feels like we're kind of hidden behind the scenes, and you pull us out of your pocket when you need someone to manage this discipline, when you need to switch a kid from one teacher's class into my class. Well, how about show those teachers the behavior management skills that are working in my class? How about you show them, what does culturally responsive teaching look like? What does restorative justice look like? But once again, going back to what I said before, it's the bias. You can't have teachers teach culture responsibly if you're not checking your bias, because then you feel like certain things are unimportant. Well, I don't need to teach like this because that's not important, and that's not what they need to know, or that's not going to help us get to this achievement gap. No, these things are very important. Making those connections with your students are very important. And if that's what's working in my classroom, making those connections, how about we introduce that into another classroom? And then how about I lead it? But it's like I said, it's very hard for me to lead it if you think that the staff may not feel that I can be the forefront of the staff because of my color, because you may feel like the staff may reject what I'm saying because I'm a Black teacher.
Thanks, Briana. I really appreciate your vulnerability and truth that you're speaking there of your experiences. And I think those are words that we need to hear. So thank you so much.
And there are several comments in the chat really affirming what you're saying. And one being, not just that we need to check our biases, but that our actions show our biases, which I thought was a great insight. So thanks for sharing that. So I appreciate you bringing forward, Briana, the need for culturally responsive teaching, and also the importance of making connections. We heard this morning the importance of not just knowing our students' names, but knowing their needs as well.
Right. And as we continue to have conversations, and I really invite Briana or Michael to talk about this, but one of the major barriers, one of the major leaky points in the diversifying the teacher pipeline is the education experiences that our students of color are having. So traumatic experiences in the K-12 education field are a major barrier to teachers of color reentering the field, which makes sense, right? Why would you want to go back into a space that was hurtful, traumatizing, belittling? So I'm wondering if Briana or Michael, you'd be willing to share your thoughts a little bit on how this point becomes such a problem when trying to diversify the teacher pipeline.
Well, I think a child's experience, as far as having social capital, I think Briana said that she had parents that were educators. Am I correct on that? So.
Not necessarily, but my parents
you
were
had educated people around
my
you.
education, yeah.
Yeah, so she had social capital. So I grew up 2-parent household, they stress education. So I had social capital. So I was able to overcome whatever barrier that school system had because I had social capital to go to if I was having trouble in school. So I was labeled and all that kind of stuff, but I was able to overcome it. But what about a Black kid that don't have that social capital, that's coming from a broken home? So yes, that traumatic experience does affect whether or not they're going to go back into the into teaching, because if it's a school to prison pipeline, then the reality is, and most of my friends, they have went to prison. And thinking back how they was treated in school, everything they did, it was a write-up, get out, go to in school, you suspended for 10 days. And so think about the learning loss. They're not really learning anything. And then so school, the question is, why do you come to school? And so you have such of a bad experience that yes, I do believe that is true about that being a major barrier, because they're not going to enter the teaching field, they're not going to enter any field worth making a living. So for students of color or any student, it's social capital that they have kind of outside of the school that can kind of offset, because the school is not going to be perfect, and there's barriers you have to overcome. But I think social capital that a child has, really is going to affect whether or not they enter into teaching. And you see those positive examples, and then you have a male teacher, and then you start to navigate like that. But traumatic experiences is a major reason why I know black males don't go back into teaching. Go into teaching. And then if you're a Black male and you wasn't, and I hate to say this, and you wasn't like an athlete, you probably don't have a good school experience, because you're not going to be recognized. You're going to be labeled as a troublemaker or whatever. You walk down the hallway, they're going to say something about, hey, they're going to say something about your clothes. They're going to say something, don't say, they're going to say something that's culturally how Black males act. It's going to be weaponized. And so it's just going to be a traumatic experience. And then, then they're not going to reenter.
Yeah, and I really just charge us. What you're saying is so critical at this moment. And I just want us to really think right now, how can we end that on Monday, right? How can we start to prevent those traumatic experiences on Monday and in our classrooms and in our buildings? So thank you so much for sharing that. Let's move on to the next question, because I'm just keeping a little bit of an eye on time.
That I'm struck to both Briana and Michael, how you credit the social support that you got from your families and how critical that was. And Michael, you also mentioned extra support from teachers that were role models that you admired. So it's such a reminder for all of us as we think about administrators and hiring committees, how critical it is that we are building that professional capital within our school buildings, where teachers are going to realize the importance of that, providing that support to give our students what they need and when they need it. So an additional theme that came up in several focus groups was that diversifying the teacher pipeline really needs support, such as affinity or peer groups, coaching and mentorship, as we just discussed, and that it's so critical that mentors know their students, that mentors know their mentees well and understand the goals. I know this came up, Michael, in our focus group, that, when teachers felt isolated and where they felt that they weren't valued, they simply didn't stay long. And sometimes they left the profession completely. And if either of you want to talk about that experience, if you've seen it in your schools, but perhaps even more importantly, what schools have done to make sure that mentorship was in place, that there were places where teachers of color could connect and collaborate together, where all teachers could feel valued.
In my school district, our superintendent, the diversity of our school district is like this. Our school district, our superintendent is Canadian, calls himself Canadian, and he has a Black wife. Our deputy superintendent, who's second in charge, is a Black female. And so when we talk about these things, a lot of these things is what our school district have been implementing. So what I did yesterday, I went around and talked to some first-year teachers, and I asked them, do you have a mentor? And all of them said yes. One teacher, I think it's her second year, and she says her mentor gets on her nerves because the mentor is making her be a better teacher in practice. And I know she was just saying it tongue in cheek, but I was happy that a first-year teacher she's not experiencing that isolation, that burnout. She has that support, and it's coming from the top down. It's coming from initiatives by our school district. By no means am I saying that my school district is perfect, but I think having that diversity at that level, they have an understanding of what a minority teacher, or any teacher for that matter, is going through, and they provide that, particularly for those first year teachers, because they see teachers leaving, and so they're doing everything that they can, research-based, to keep that. So that's one thing that my school district is doing. And every one of I interviewed 3, because that was all that was there on Friday. Friday they take off. But I interviewed 3, and they seem pretty happy as far as the mentor. And they really have to go and meet with that mentor, because a lot of times, school district put it in their plan, but they don't never implement it. But in this case, the young ladies that I've talked to was like, my mentor gets on my nerves, but that's a good thing. The mentor is actually meeting with them and making sure that they feel welcome and wanted, and because they don't want to lose these bright teachers.
In my district currently, we don't have diverse teachers who are mentors. Like I said, in every school, there's probably 2 teachers of color. Let me not say that. There would be 2 Black teachers, and then teachers of color are typically bilingual teachers. So there's maybe 4 out of 75 staff. And there isn't really mentorship. And when I was in New York City, it's a different culture. So you do have mentors, and your mentors many times, it's especially depending on the demographic of the area, your mentor would be a teacher of color. I definitely think that's something that should be in practice and everywhere. And I also think that it should also come from your schooling as well. So when you're going through when you're obtaining your degree in education and you're a teacher of color, what about those groups, forming those groups there to help you get to the next step, to help you to navigate those waters? Because it's really a big navigational piece, like navigating, especially in certain communities. It's something that you need to know and you need to be able to navigate through.
Yeah, I think when done well, mentoring makes a tremendous difference. And that's supported in the literature and was definitely supported in our focus groups as well. When it came to recruitment, another thing that we saw was that, or that we heard, was that low salary can be a deterrent when recruiting talented students of diversity. One of our participants in the audience today asked, how are Grow Your Own programs funded? That if you are trying to attract talented students, talented, people who are interested in going into teaching as undergraduate students, how do you fund those programs to grow your own? At the university that I teach at, we have this is our third round with a grant from the Office of Indian Education, where we provide funding for Native scholars, American Indian scholars who are already in the teaching field, but they want to come back and get a position in leadership or into special ed if they're an initial. And so that funding, then their college is paid for, and then they go back into their communities. And we have found that as we're recruiting, that is a goal that they have, to go back onto their reservation schools and make a difference, because they know how important it is for their students to see Native American educators in all positions, including positions of leadership. And so that's one way, and others might have other ways that they've heard of funding coming forward for Grow Your Own programs. But as long as they go back into communities or districts of need, that funding does not have to be paid back. And that might come up again in our next question. I'm going to go to the next theme because we're almost at the end of our themes, and we do want to provide some time to open it up. We have about 10 minutes left, so if we can kind of get through our last theme, we'll open it to the audience.
Yes, and we are just going to turn this over to either Michael or Briana, but what policies, so policies, exclusionary policies that have been created and devalue people of color and diminish their voices. I think about a bill that was passed in Iowa that discouraged and even prevented certain things being taught in schools about race that we've really had to try to combat here. So what policies have you seen in education that diminish the voices of people of color, whether that's bias in licensure exams, behavior management and policies in school, at the local level, at the state level, at the school level? What are some policies you have seen that do devalue and diminish the voices of people of color?
I know in Arkansas, there was a predominantly white school district that had a what they call them annual, and they had current events, and it addressed George Floyd. But what the school district did is tore the page out, and so those students didn't have exposure to what America is, So yes, there's been a push in our legislature to not so much stop CRT, but to stop some about the words. You can't use these certain words and stuff like that. So a legislator had brought that up, but it never did pass. But there's other ways that school districts can diminish the voices of people of color. But Arkansas, the state of Arkansas, most Black people in Arkansas live in Little Rock, where I live, or South Arkansas. So since I teach in a school that's predominantly Black, I don't really get my voice devalued. But I'm pretty sure if I was up like that, probably would, or I probably wouldn't be able to be as vocal about certain issues as the example of the picture being taken out of George Floyd, like it didn't happen, But I want to piggyback on the comment. I feel like you cannot fix it if you're not willing to face it. And so the conversation needs to be had what's happening. It's going to have blowups along the way, but when you address it, you get a clear understanding of where people are coming from.
I wouldn't say necessarily policies that have been created. I would say that there's a lack of policies created in the nature of why isn't African-American literature or African-American history is a part of American history. American history is taught in schools, but the amount of African-American history is not. So it's kind of like we pick and choose what we want within the policy. So if there was a policy created that it was a mandate to teach African-American history, which it shouldn't be because that's something that should be common. that I think those things need to be created, because it's not just common knowledge that this needs to be done. I would also say testing. So certain tests are used to kind of keep out African American or students of color. And students aren't given equal opportunity within schools. So you're not getting the same education that I'm getting in one part of New York, where it's a high population of non-students of color. I'm not getting that same quality of education or that same funding even in places where there are a high population of students of color. So it's kind of like there's no policy created, but it's what we're doing with the policies that are created, how we're kind of tweaking them to fit our own situation and narrative.
And you're muted, sorry.
Thank you. Finally, it's important that we ensure that these efforts are sustainable in order to avoid teacher frustration. And I just want to ask both of you, among the challenges, and Briana, in your focus group, I asked you, why do you stay amidst all these challenges? And you said, if I leave, who are my kids going to have? If I leave, I won't be able to make an impact. First, I really want to acknowledge that burden, that you are carrying that burden and shouldn't have to carry that alone. And then for other educators of color, would you both just briefly in this space today give some advice you have for them for when things get to that breaking point and when they want to leave?
So I would say I'm kind of stuck in a space where you need to protect your own mental space. But at the same time, I'm always the type of person to think of, well, what can I do to fix this? So because I don't have a voice here, where am I going to now have this voice? So get involved in things, in organizations that are making recommendations to school board. Get involved in organizations that are making recommendations for the state board. So get involved in these organizations that are impacting change for students of color or for teachers of color.
Yes, I agree. You just have to have perseverance. And then I always go back to who we are as a people. That motivates me. Reading personal stories, getting involved, being an advocate, all those things keep me in the profession. And then, making that difference in that child and investing in that child is priceless. And that's what I would say to any teacher, regardless of what color they are. It's a reason why you do it, because that's your purpose. Even when you say you're gonna quit, you get up every day and you go do it because it's just in you to do it, and you just have to find that. But I think the main thing is that perseverance. And I know when I first started teaching and coaching, I had all these ideas, and I try to bounce it off people. Some people are not going to be receptive to it, and you kind of get discouraged. But then, you just keep praying, I guess, and then you meet people that have the same, you meet people with the same drive that you have, and that's how that's what keeps you in the profession, is meeting those people that have the same. You're gonna have differences, but have the same drive as you, and then that, before you know it, you in it 20, 30 years.
Thank you both. We have some really quick application pieces, things that you can do right now that we'll share with you in the last minute of our presentation. And then Jen shared a link to a resource document for you. Thank you both, Briana and Michael. We're so grateful for your insights, your vulnerability, and your willingness to share. So I really appreciate you being there. Let's show them some love in the chat. just a few application items to go out and do right now. If you can go to the next slide, Brenda. So diversify your curriculum. That's a huge piece. Ensure your students have windows to see others and mirrors to see themselves. Gain insights about your school culture, and you can do that through surveying or interviewing teachers of color, allowing creating authentic spaces to be able to receive feedback. Examine your hiring practices, and finally, analyze discipline data and immediately address disparities. And these are things that can address some of the points that came up that become problematic in the pipeline. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. Again, thank you, Brenda, for coordinating this, and to Michael and Briana for your work as educators and for sharing that with us today.
And taking the time to look at the resources that Leigh Ann put together would definitely be worth your while. There's some great things on there. And thank you again, Michael and Briana.
And Brenda, if you go to the next slide, they can actually click the QR code and grab those resources, or they can get the link from Jen as well.
Perfect. There it is. Thank you, everyone.